Okay, well, firstly, thank you for having, I'm really feel really honoured to be here, and it's so nice to see in the chat box so many different nationalities and countries represented. That makes me feel like I'm travelling, even though I'm stuck at home. As Anna and Stella said, I am also a freelance journalist, so I will be attending lots of the other assembly sessions, I hope. And my background is in, well, I started my career working for business to business websites and helping them grow their audiences. And from there, I've always ended up working on kind of digital journalism projects. And a lot of that has been to do with different ways to involve readers, viewers, audiences. And so along the way, I think I've learned a few different things about how to engage those audiences. Before I became a freelance, I spent a long time working at The Guardian in the UK, looking after their social media audiences and their website communities. And then since then, I've ended up sort of sticking my nose into other newsrooms to try and help them develop their own audience strategies in lots of different places. But I think a lot of the strategies that larger news organizations use are actually very, very applicable to us as individuals when we're launching our own projects, but they can seem a bit mystifying, or even the phrase audience development is a bit ugly and not very kind of approachable. But actually I think we can, as individual kind of proprietors and project owners, whether we're launching newsletters, podcasts, websites, channels, we will probably know our audiences innately a lot better, and that's a really good place to start. Anyway, what I'm going to just do is just say what we'll kind of cover this morning. As you can probably already tell, one of my biggest flaws is that I talk too much. So I'm going to try really, really hard to make sure that I don't eat into our Q&A time. However, a lot of you do have one-to-one sessions booked with me later in the week, which is amazing. Where we can pick up like really specific details of your projects. And as Anna and Stella mentioned, I'm A, very easy to find online to have other conversations, and B, we do have this wonderful Slack channel where we can chat ongoing, and I'm really keen to hear how your projects develop as well. Okay, so what are we going to cover this morning? First off, just a very simple approach to this idea of audience development, something that I have used throughout my kind of career, and I think it's just a really helpful way to build up ideas for your product and for any future kind of projects that you want to launch. And then I think we'll talk a bit about a really crucial thing about ways to get to know your audience better. Then the slightly unsexy bit about kind of setting goals and measuring how successful we are in meeting those goals. And then a bit about how to develop what I would call a community, not just an audience, but a group within your audience who are very actively participating or engaged with your offering. And then hopefully, if we get time, if not, I will just share them directly, a few examples of individual journalists or journalist cohorts who I think are doing really interesting things across different types of products that they've launched themselves. And we already saw in the chat box, we have the most amazing range of projects already covered, from travel to LGBTQ+, to what else did I say, nutrition, to crime. This is great. You've all got really diverse topic areas that you're covering. Okay, let's start with this idea of a very simple approach to audience development. And this is what that first table document that Anna has shared with you pertains to. So I think a really simple way to think about growing an audience and developing it for your product or your project, whatever platform you're using on, it doesn't really matter, is to think about it with these three kind of factors: content, distribution, and community. And we're going to kind of work through each of these in this presentation, in this training. So I have to give a big shout out to my colleagues who I've worked with at Condé Nast, who have spent a lot of time workshopping this idea and have certainly helped me change my thinking about audience development. But basically, the simple way to think about it is you could have the best possible story for a newsletter. You could have 20 and you think this is going to be great. I can send out one a week for 20 weeks. But if you don't have the right distribution channels set in place, how are people going to know how to find you? How are they going to consume those great stories? Equally, you could have great content and great distribution, but you're missing a trick if you don't seek to get to know the community of people who have decided to sign up to your very bespoke newsletter or podcast. They are likely to be have a vested interest in what you're covering because you're covering a very specific story. So you can just do content, or you can just do content distribution, but actually I think all three together give you a chance to have a much richer relationship with your audience, which will help then inform your original product. So what do I mean by content? I don't usually like the word content, if I'm honest, but actually in this case, I mean, it's the substance of your product. So we could be talking here about podcasting, we could be talking about a YouTube channel, an Instagram account, a newsletter, website, you name it. But content, you know, what topics are you covering? And crucially, what kind of questions are you trying to answer? Your specific product, what is it trying to do? Distribution is the slightly unglamorous side, you know, the channels that you're using to reach your target audience. And we'll definitely come back to this idea of a target audience in a bit and ways to kind of discover who they are. So how are people going to find your content? And that could be a combination of things. Like you could say, well, actually, I'm hoping it'll be mainly through email. But in order to promote that, I'm also going to need a website, a Twitter account. You know, it's thinking about, okay, well, what are my channels for getting my content to the right people, to the people that are my target audience? And finally, one of my favorite things to think about, and we have some lovely EJC community editors on the call as well. The third part, this idea of ways in which you can deepen your relationship with the audience that you're building. So this is thinking about, how am I not just going to build a passive readership or viewership or listenership, but how can I build an audience that are going to be more loyal to my product? How am I going to build an audience that might want to come back every week or every month or every day, maybe? What calls to action can I build into my content that will help build that? What can I do with the channels that I choose for my distribution to help find those people? And then also, how will I monitor the kind of health and interaction of that community? So the main thing to say here is, just if you are at a stage of your project where you are generating ideas for it, or indeed you are about to launch, I like to use this next table to organize my ideas. And this could be for an individual edition of your newsletter or podcast, or it could be for the overall project. But to think through these kind of 4 questions, because I think it brings us slightly into the real world, to be honest. So starting off with, what's the idea? What's the content? Then what am I thinking about in terms of distribution? Then what immediate ideas do I have in terms of engaging my audience on those channels? So for example, if perhaps I'm starting up a new, okay, well, I'll give you a good example. I've recently been involved starting up a community for freelance journalists. So our content ideas for that community were job offerings, opportunities to work, and skills and training resources. How will we distribute this content? Well, I'm thinking I'm going to do it on Slack, so it's a private space for people to get involved. And because it's a sensitive topic, sometimes people sharing information about their work. So that kind of feels like the right place that people could congregate. How am I going to engage the audience on those channels? I've got a bunch of ideas, but I would list those kind of out. But it'd be things like daily check-ins, regular weekly events, and monthly online Q&As with experts, as an example. And then this 4th column is really crucial. Like, what are the things maybe that I haven't thought about that might be stopping me from doing that? What do I need to make this happen? So just because we haven't got loads of time, I would love if you would fill out maybe just one row in this table relating to your specific project. Particularly if you're going to come and have a one-to-one with me later in the week, that would be great, because then we can talk about it in a bit more detail. So answer those questions. It can just be one individual idea you're working on. You can have it for the whole project if you want, but just jot down some initial thoughts. I feel like I should have some music during this bit, just to help everyone think.
Should I turn on the Star Wars music again?
Yeah. And if you're scratching your head, don't worry too much, because what we're going to do is really dig into those second, kind of third and fourth columns. You know, how are we going to make distribution work for us? How are we going to make engagement work for us? And then how are we going to know if we're doing it right? But this is just a good, I think, way to ideate, you know, to create ideas, to kind of flesh things out and think them through a bit. And often as journalists, I'll hold my hand up, I'm a little bit guilty of having loads of stuff to put in column 1. I've got loads of ideas for stories, but they're not so great always about thinking about columns 2, 3, and 4. Okay, I'm going to leave you scribbling away, and you can always come back to this and fill it out. But I would really encourage you to, particularly if you've got a session booked in with me, to come back to this and kind of jot some things down, and we can use it to talk through those ideas individually as well. But as I said, you know, this is a very simple kind of way just to get into audience development. It's about breaking it down so it seems a bit less nebulous. The second really important part of the phrase audience development is this idea of audience. It can be so homogenous. We don't just have one big lump of an audience reading our work or watching our work. We don't, to any website, there is not just one audience type coming to it, for example. We need to be able to break that down a bit further. That's what we're going to look into a little bit now. And I'm going to take you through a few different kind of tactics for this, including a couple of things that I have used a lot in my work, and they sound a bit scarier than they are because they're called audience canvases. But actually, again, they're just really simple kind of worksheets to help us break down this idea of who our target audience is. So you've all signed up to a webinar on audience development, so I don't think talking about who your audience is going to come as much of a surprise. And I think you probably all, if you've signed up to this, might have quite a good idea of who you want to reach with your product, who your target audience is. So learning as much as we can about them as possible is extremely helpful. If you've already launched your product, that doesn't matter, there's still time to do that. But if you're at the stage where you're just trying to work it out, or you're pre-launch, then this is a really good opportunity to think about ways that we can get to know your audience, your target audience better, or to mine into who your existing audience is. The first reason why is that knowing more about your audience will help inform your content, your storytelling, your journalism. You know, you want to produce content that appeals to that audience, or reflects their experience, or is informed by them. This is the beauty of having a more direct relationship with your audience through launching a kind of individual project. Where you choose to distribute your content is really important, that we know that your audience is actually there. There's no point in picking a platform or a social media channel where your target audience doesn't exist. And equally, without knowing exactly who you want to engage, that's going to affect everything from when you publish your content, when you send a newsletter, or when you post to your channel, and down to what input you might ask for that audience. Also how they might behave, or how likely they are to actually respond or participate. So the more we can do to build up a rounded idea of our audience, the better. So I think there's a few things that you want to think about. first of all, who are the people that you ideally would be reaching with your product? Sum it up in just one sentence. Imagine it's a kind of pitch for your product, or the line that you would write in your bio or your about me section for your product. Then think about, where are they? Geographically, yes, is important, because that might affect what language you publish in, or what time zone, and when you publish. But also, what channels? Where do they live online? Are you going to be connecting with them on a very personal space, like in their inbox or on their mobile phone? Is it going to be in the middle of a very busy work day? Or is it going to be when they're out on a run, or exercising, or walking to work? What else do they do online? You know, what are they present on other social networks? Do they engage in other kind of online communities? And if so, which? And then trying to think of this question of what makes them act, what drives them to take action, what might motivate them to participate in your product? What's the thing that's going to get them to sign up or log in or follow? And is that thing professional? Is it personal? What is that motivating factor? Now, these might seem like slightly kind of philosophical questions, but actually I think trying to answer them when you're developing a product is really important, because it gets you to think like your audience member. And then it's not, as I said, just about, oh, I've got a great story that I want to tell. It's you thinking, well, what kind of frame of mind is my audience going to be in when they listen to my podcast? Or what are they going to be expecting when they sign up to my newsletter? So you might instinctively be able to answer those questions. That might be what's driving you to launch this product. But the next thing to do is to try and verify those instincts. So maybe you can answer those initial questions. Who are they? Where are they? What makes them act? And then go and do your homework. You know, research everything you can about this target audience that you've thought up. Where are they most likely to be online? What are their online behaviors? What topics interest them that you will cover and that you won't cover? And then I would say, if you can, ask that audience. Now, this could be really simple things. Unfortunately, we're not all backed by massive news organizations necessarily, so we don't have our own audience research teams to help us do this. But some very simple things. Can you set up a few, background interviews with people that you think would be in this target audience, and ask them a set of questions so you can get a greater picture of who these kind of people are? What about setting up a really quick survey using something like Google Forms, or a Microsoft equivalent, or SurveyMonkey or something similar, just to collect information from a wider group? You could send it directly to people. You could share it with professional organizations if that's relevant, just to think about getting more information about some of those questions. Now, if you are going to send out a kind of audience survey, really think about the data that you want to collect. You want it to be as structured as possible, because you want it to be able to inform what you do. So think about asking really specific questions, as well as more open ones. So maybe you would want to know how old they are, where they are, and perhaps their occupation. But then you'd also want some more behavioral ones, like how often, how do you use social media? What do you use it for? Or what's your interest in the subject of, what connects you to travel and tourism? This was Victoria mentioned her podcast, launching. So just so you can get a more general sense of why they are interested in this topic. Personal connection, professional connection, and you're starting then to build up a really much more detailed picture of who your target audience is. If you've already launched your product, don't worry, you can and absolutely still should do this. You should try and survey your existing audience to find out more about them. And we'll come back to what we can do with the answers to those questions later, and how we can build what I would call kind of audience segments. Once you've done a bit of that homework, and you've directly tried to speak to as many people as possible, whether through just phone calls or interviews or anecdotally, or through something more structured like a survey, build up a persona. Use all this information to actually sketch out who these people are. And I mean, really go for it. Like, give them a name, give them a face. You can use a stock image from online. Give them reasons for why they would subscribe or follow or use your editorial product. What do they like? What do they not like? Make them as real as possible, because this is who you are ultimately producing for, and this is who you want to reach and engage. And the more specific you can be, the better, to be honest, because this is who you are going to be accountable to, and this will help us when we're measuring, am I ultimately being successful? Am I reaching these specific people? So it's really going to help you focus. So one way to help us build up an audience persona is to use, there's a couple of options here. This is just a very simple audience canvas that I've used a lot, and I've used it for all kinds of different editorial products, everything from like launching a new website to launching a new journalism series on a particular topic. So it's laid out in a slightly odd format, but essentially you've got what we were just talking about there. And as I said, you can start this based on what you instinctively think your audience will be, and then you can go away and verify it. So just for fun, I would love to spend some time going through this now, but I'm going to leave this with you. But what I would love you to do is, if you've got a piece of paper near you, most of us will do, I do, could you draw me a picture of someone that you think would be in your target audience? You don't have to be the best artist. This is not an art challenge, but give us an indication of perhaps who they are, maybe something that they like to do, and maybe, yeah, where they like to spend their time, perhaps. Let's do a little charades. So essentially you would usually be filling this out, and I would let you do it in words, but just for fun, can you give me a little drawing of someone that is a target audience member for your particular project that you're thinking of? I'll do it too. I'm going to draw one for the Slack community for journalists that we're working on. And you can excuse my very poor drawing skills.
Yeah, Laura, that's a great idea. So I'm gonna give them 60 seconds, if that's okay for you, so we can draw together. Perfect.
Quick draw.
Yes, perfect. Okay, guys, are you ready? Laura, what do you think? Or you need more time?
No, let's do it. I can talk through it a bit more detail, but just for fun, let's all hold. I'm going to show you how terrible my drawing is as well.
So let's do it. If you want, guys, just turn on your camera and let's see the beautiful drawings. Okay.
Oh, some of you are actually really good at drawing. This is not fair. Some of you, Michael, Sherry, this is not fair. You've got actual artistic skill.
It was your idea, Laura. La, la, la.
I know, I can't criticize. But yeah, I mean, usually we would do it in words. So I've drawn a really, so mine is it's a stick figure. So there is no definition of whether, who this person specifically is, but I've more drawn around them. So I've tried to indicate that they are international, because we want to go for an international audience, that they are technologically savvy, and skilled in multimedia. So this is a kind of starting point. But yeah, usually we would work through our audience canvas. And to be honest, I would start with, I would ignore the what, I would ignore that last column, I'd even fold it over on a piece of paper. And I just want to start by answering these questions like, who are they? Give me as much as I possibly can. And that media habits bit is really important. So trying to work out, like, are they likely to consume the product that you're offering? That's really important when we're thinking about what channels you want to promote it on, how you want to distribute it, the format of it, how long it should be, do you need a mobile, you know, all of these kind of questions. It's really important because you don't want to spend months and months and months building something really wonderful and a really rich like storytelling offering, and then no one consumes it because actually it's not quite the right format to fit in with their habits or their lives. And then, yeah, this idea of what and how is quite important, because maybe you have a different version of your product that fits in with someone's morning routine and something that's different for weekend evenings. You know, you might end up developing your audience strategy and your distribution strategy to meet very specific habits within the day. So as I say, I would really encourage you to fill this canvas out. You can do it as we're talking now, but also if we've got some time, or if you've got a one-to-one with me, we could talk through it in more detail, and then try to verify it as much as possible. What's your instincts? And then what can you find out about these people? It doesn't necessarily, like, as big a sample of people to speak to would be great, but if you've got someone in mind who is your dream audience member, if you were like, if they signed up to a newsletter, I would be over the moon, great. They're a great person to start with. Try and speak to them, or try and learn as much about them as you can and map them out in this canvas. What do they look like? Because we want to find similar people to them. If they're your dream audience member, perfect, let's go for it. Because actually that might be, when we come to measuring success, success might be, I want to reach the 5 most influential people in this industry. Great. Let's start with them and what they look like as an audience member. One of the things, and this is true of individuals launching products and really massive organizations who launch editorial products, one of the biggest things that goes wrong is they don't do this work either at the beginning or in the early stages, and they don't know who they're going after. And they launch a beautiful, shiny, really wonderful journalistic product, but actually they don't know how to measure whether it's working or not, because they're not sure who they were trying to get to in the first place. And they're just chasing after very large numbers rather than the right audience. And so I really want you to think about, what is important to me? Who is it important to me that I get my work in front of? So that's audience canvas number 1. And you may find some of these things fit in with the way you like to work, or you might not like them. That is totally up to you. My strategy would be, I would fill this out. I would sort of fold over that what column and come back to it later. So I'd start with who, what, and kind of how, the bits in the middle. And then once I'd built up this, my lovely persona, person here, I'd take that information and I would add it to this section here. I'm just gonna, so the first section here, just need to move my lovely Zoom chatter viewer, just need to minimize you a bit, and fill out. So there I've got my audience persona. I can pop that in the top left corner under who my audience are. I've already done my homework now. I've worked out who they are. And I can use that in conjunction with this second canvas or kind of spreadsheet. And the thing I would then start to look at is, okay, well, now I want to build a strategy that helps me target that individual person that I've identified. So I'd start to answer these other questions around motivations and incentives. So what motivates them to participate? What moves them to action? We mentioned that at the beginning. And then what else could I do to incentivize them? So when you're thinking about what questions to ask perhaps those people, or what you might be anecdotally looking for when you're researching this audience online, those are the questions you want to try and be able to answer, because they're going to help inform not just perhaps the actual content or the journalism you produce, but also particularly the things you might do to get them to sign up and engage in the first place. So a good example of this is that right back at the beginning when we talked about like what kind of question are you trying to answer, a lot of the most successful editorial products, not only do they have great kind of journalism in terms of the stories that they're telling, but they serve a particular purpose or they fulfill a particular need. That might be that they have some kind of utility, like they help people understand a subject or they show them how to do something. Or it might be that they've got a part to them that also offers a really specific value, like a way to connect with other people or a way to digest very quickly all the other related stories on that topic area. It might be that it shares a really particular regular data point with them that they can't get anywhere else. You know, so what are the things that will motivate people to come to you specifically and to stay with you? And what does that audience really need from you? So I would really encourage you, once you've done, going backwards, once you've done your kind of who are my audience, pop them in the top quadrant of this box, and then think a little bit more deeply about, okay, well, they've told me this information about them, I found this about them. How am I going to change what I offer them to meet those specific audience needs? Now I've blocked out the second part of this because I think actually I will come back to this a little bit. And if we're talking about more sort of sustained engagement, i.e. when your product is a bit older and a bit more mature, we can definitely discuss that and probably discuss that a bit more on Slack as well. And certainly if you're in a one-to-one session with me, we can work through that bit together as well. I think that would be really useful because a lot of that will depend on what kind of product you're launching. You know, is it a newsletter? Is it a podcast? Is it an Instagram account? Is it a Vimeo channel? You know, it will be a bit dependent on the platform. Okay, what time are we? Oh, see, I told you I'd talk too much. Right, I'm going to do a little bit on setting goals and measuring success. And then I think I'll stop for some Q&A chats because it'd be really nice to hear back from you guys. And I can weave in some of the examples into the Q&A, I'm sure, because they'll be relevant. And if not, I can always share them with you after. I'm trying to read Anna and Stella's face to make sure that that is an okay plan of action. Yes, good. Okay, good. Okay. So a little on setting goals and measuring success. So once we've got this kind of target audience in mind, we really need to think about how we know if we are reaching them or not, and if we are developing them along with our product as it continues. So I'd also encourage you very much during this section to think about what your other aims for this project might be, because you want to kind of capture everything. You know, is the fact that you're launching this product also about you personally being able to set aside time to report on this subject? Is that actually a goal? Is it also about, I want to find a different way to brand myself? You know, that's speaking really personally. There's a few kind of topics I'm personally passionate about that I am struggling to find the time to report on at the moment. And I think, well, actually, maybe if I just did it myself, that would feel personally satisfying. And my goal would be that I had managed to carve out time to write on something I really care about. So don't discard the more kind of personal goals as well. I think they're really, really important. Maybe your goal is about launching your product so that you generate other commissions from other places. Maybe it's about making loads of money. I don't know, that could be it as well. Don't forget to capture all these kind of measures of success. Success is very personal to what you want your project to achieve. It is not all about the highest numbers or the biggest volume. It's about, as I said, getting to the right people and achieving the things that you really want it to achieve. So what does success look like to me? Make it really personal. Then when we're setting goals, we need to think about, well, how will I know when I actually achieve that? Like, what am I looking for? What are my indicators? How will I know when I reach my target audience? And I'm going to come back to that. There's some ways we can measure it. how can I measure that they're growing, that target audience? And how can I measure that they are not just growing, but they're actually interacting with me, or they're spending more time with me, or they are engaging in some way? And then this really crucial final question, and again, this is a kind of tools question, is if I can't answer any of those above questions, what other things might I need to put in place before I launch my product, or as I'm launching my product? Do I need to invest in some extra software? Do I need to invest in some analytical tools? Do I need to start a big spreadsheet where I can collect all this information? Like, have you got the right things in place at the beginning to help you measure these things? So I would try and answer these questions initially and just say, okay, where are the gaps? And then look at how you can fill those gaps. So it might just be that, for example, I know what success will look like to me. I know what it will kind of feel like and look like when I achieve it. But I don't know that at the moment I'm getting enough information back about who I'm reaching in my target audience. So you might say, right, okay, well, I need to make sure that I put some steps in place to know that I can answer that question. So on that note, here are some things we can think about. And I promise then I will stop and take questions because I know we're short of time. You might, if you've been in any kind of media organization or following any discussions about our industry recently, have heard some of these words and they can sound really, really off-putting. And the main thing I want to say to you is don't be put off by them, because actually, even as individuals, they can be really useful to us. I've linked in this slide to a kind of sort of a walkthrough from an analytics company that's a really simple way to set up your own kind of measurements as well. And I would really encourage you to read that. But just very briefly, in the world of metrics and measurements, there are kind of two pools, and these are two words that I always mispronounce, so I'm going to try really hard now. Quantitative and qualitative. And they sound really similar, which really doesn't help. But quant stuff is, as you expect, it's about quantity. So it's about volumes, it's about numbers and amounts. Qualitative is about impact and quality measures. And often that gets pushed aside because we're so busy thinking about how many people signed up, how many people listened, how many people downloaded. Oh my gosh, it's lower than last week. What does that mean? But you want to think about, when you're setting those goals, which one of these are important? You're going to want a combination. So quantitative, this idea of volumes and amounts, you might want to track some of those things because they will tell you interesting things about where your audience is coming from. So acquisition, like how many people visited my website from social media versus how many people came to my website from a search engine. That's interesting. That tells us a bit about their behavior. You might also be interested in things like how many people are new who signed up to my newsletter this week, and how many people who also opened it last week. You know, that, I think sometimes the words can be unhelpful because they talk about things like reach and returning users versus new users. Well, actually, let's break this down and work out which one of these are useful to you. I'm going to share this with you with a definition of all these things. And what I would really do is encourage you to pick and choose the ones that you think are useful with you. Don't overdo it. Just pick a few that you think, actually, those things are really important to me right now. And these will change with your product, like the maturity of your product. Because as you're starting out, reach might be more important to you. Reach is how many people potentially saw my thing, how many people potentially saw my Facebook post or saw the launch of my podcast in iTunes. You know, it's a helpful number, but it can often be a very inflated number because just because someone saw it didn't mean they did anything about it. So we want that as a measure when we're starting out to go, okay, well, I've seen a lot of people have seen my announcement or seen my post or seen my website advertised, but only this many people are actually doing anything with it. So it's important, but it needs to be in context with other measures. As I said, I will share all the definitions, but what I would do is encourage you to pick the ones that you think are most important to you right now and kind of stick to them and get to know them best. Qualitative stuff is just as important. And a lot of this can be very anecdotal. It's about doing things like keeping a track of every time you got a review or a feedback or a comment or an email from someone who consumed your product. That's important too. It's about not just how many people you're reaching, but who are those people? As I said, going back and surveying those people, asking them questions, looking at who signed up this week. Where are they? Are they in your target audience? So make sure you combine these two things. Now, we are running out of time, so I want to make sure we have time for questions. As I said, I will share these things. What I will just say as a kind of final comment on setting goals and kind of measuring yourself, the really important thing to do as well is to, as I said, set the goals that are really important to you, pick some of those measures. I can help as well with like sort of tools questions, but look at what you can measure and what you can't measure, and work out, well, actually, okay, I need to invest a bit of time or effort in finding my own ways to collect the information I need to. And then get really friendly with the data, get a bit obsessed with kind of analyzing this stuff. And it will really help you get to know your audience better, but also enhance what you're offering. So make sure that you don't just collect all this information, actually then spend some time looking over it and then creating, you know, a kind of action plan. It can be really simple. Some really simple examples I've got on the screen now. You know, analyze it and then act. So, okay, well, this has told me this and this is what I told you I was going to talk too much. So I'm just going to pause here and try and answer some specific questions. But as I said, I am super easy to find online and in the Slack, and I love talking about this stuff. So I'm really looking forward to all the one-to-ones we've got together. Let me stop sharing my screen very briefly. I can always bring it back if we need to.